312 freedom seekers walked out of a single basement in Virginia without ever stepping back into the open air of the slaveholders' road. The floorboards above their heads groaned beneath the boots of the slave catchers who patrolled the district day and night, yet not a single soul hidden below was ever discovered. How did a man whom the law legally classified as property build an impenetrable fortress right under the noses of the men who claimed to own him? Before the name Thomas H. Jones or any other legendary conductor became synonymous with the midnight roads of the Underground Railroad, there were countless nameless architects working in the shadows of the American South. In the antebellum landscape of the 1850s, the official histories recorded the plantation owners, the politicians, the passing laws, and the federal marshals. They left out the carpenters, the blacksmiths, the men and women who used floorboards, false walls, and subterranean drainage systems to carve out paths to freedom. Our story centers on an ordinary man whose name was scrubbed from the ledgers of emancipation, a man history simply left behind in the ink of an unsigned manifest. We will call him Gabriel, for it was his biblical resolve that held the brick and mortar of his hidden world together. To understand the magnitude of what Gabriel built, one must first understand the suffocating architecture of oppression in the years leading up to the Civil War. By 1850, the atmosphere across the border states had curdled into paranoia. The passing of the Fugitive Slave Act transformed the entire nation into a hunting ground. No longer could a freedom seeker find permanent safety simply by crossing an invisible state line into the north. Federal commissioners now possessed the legal authority to drag anyone back into bondage, backed by the full weight of United States marshals. Rewards for captured runaways climbed higher by the month, and professional slave catchers prowled the roads, the rail stations, and the wharves like wolves. Informants were everywhere. A stray remark at a market stall, a strange loaf of bread bought in too large quantities, or a chimney smoking during the warm months could invite suspicion, a midnight raid, and a lynching. Gabriel lived in a modest wooden house on the outskirts of a bustling southern port town, a strategic crossroads where merchant ships brought news from the north and runaway notices fluttered from every public post. To his neighbors, both white and black, Gabriel was a quiet, industrious freeman who had managed to purchase his own labor, or perhaps a trusted bondsman permitted to hire his time. He was a carpenter by trade, known for his steady hands and his quiet demeanor. But Gabriel's hands built more than cabinets and window frames. Every evening, long after the oil lamps in the surrounding plantation houses had been blown out, Gabriel descended into the crawlspace beneath his floorboards with a shovel, a handsaw, and a lantern that burned low and smokeless. The excavation was a masterpiece of silent calculation. Gabriel knew that a single misplaced clod of dirt carried out in the open could attract the eyes of prying neighbors. Every handful of earth he dug from beneath the foundation had to be meticulously dispersed. He filled the cavities of old furniture, scattered soil beneath the chicken coops, and packed dirt into the hollow spaces of rotting logs in the woodpile. Over the course of 3 grueling years, working in total darkness and suffocating heat, Gabriel hollowed out a labyrinth of tunnels that extended beneath his own home and stretched outward toward the root cellar of a sympathetic neighbor 3 properties down. This was not merely a hole in the ground, it was an engineering marvel of survival. The entrance was concealed beneath a massive, immovable hearthstone that required a precise system of wooden levers and counterweights to lift, a physical puzzle that could only be solved from the inside. Inside these earthen corridors, the air was thick with the scent of damp clay and old roots, but Gabriel engineered ventilation shafts disguised as hollowed-out fence posts that poked up innocuously among the weeds of his overgrown garden. Here, men, women, and children fleeing the whip found their first moment of absolute safety. The work was fraught with a paralyzing, day-to-day tension that tested the limits of human endurance.
Gabriel did not work alone for long.
He soon recruited Martha, a woman whose sharp intellect and calm exterior made her the ideal lookout. When the heavy boots of the slave patrol echoed down the lane, Martha did not panic. She tightened her grip on her sewing basket, her knuckles turning white as she hummed a steady tune on the front porch, signaling to anyone in the hidden depths below to freeze, to hold their breath, and to become as silent as the stone walls. Consider the sensory reality of the tunnel on a stormy night in October of 1853. Rain is hammering the muddy earth above, threatening to flood the lower trenches. A family of 4, a mother, a father, and 2 small children whose names were never written down, has just arrived after a 40-mile trek through swamp and briar. Their feet are bleeding, their clothes are torn to shreds, and their eyes are wide with a frantic, animal terror. Gabriel meets them at the hearthstone, his face streaked with sweat and coal dust. He does not offer grand speeches about liberty or the arc of the moral universe. He offers a wool blanket, a tin cup of cool water, and a whispered warning to stay low. The danger escalated exponentially when Gabriel expanded his operation from merely sheltering freedom seekers to smuggling contraband of a different kind. As the drumbeat of sectional conflict grew louder, abolitionist networks in the North began sending hidden shipments of arms and coded dispatches down south to prepare sympathetic networks for the inevitable collision. These were not crates marked with bold letters, they were hidden inside shipments of timber, barrels of salted fish, and false-bottomed wagons that rolled up to Gabriel's workshop under the cover of a moonless night.
Gabriel received muskets, ammunition, and abolitionist pamphlets printed on thin, easily concealable onion skin paper.
Handling these items meant that if he were caught, he wouldn't just be returned to slavery or sold further south, he would be executed on the spot for treason and insurrection.
There were nights when the margin for error was razor-thin.
One evening in the dead of winter, a detachment of local militia, acting on a vague tip from a disgruntled informant who suspected Gabriel was living above his station, pounded on his front door. The sound of their musket butt slamming against the oak panels caused a sharp intake of breath from Martha across the room, her chest heaving as she fought to keep her composure. Gabriel stood frozen for a fraction of a second, his pulse hammering in his ears like a war drum, before calmly setting down his carving knife and walking to the door. The militia captain, a man smelling of cheap whiskey and wet wool, demanded to search the premises.
Gabriel did not argue, nor did he cower.
With a chilling, theatrical hospitality, he invited them in, offering them cider while pointing out the meticulous carpentry of his workshop as proof of his honest labor.
For 2 agonizing hours, the soldiers tramped through the house, their hobnailed boots coming within inches of the hidden hearthstone.
One soldier even leaned his back against the very wall that concealed the vertical drop shaft. Gabriel watched them with a rigid, unblinking stillness, his fingers dug deep into his pockets, clutching the trigger of a hidden derringer. Had a single floorboard creaked out of rhythm, had a child below coughed or whimpered, the entire network would have unraveled in a single burst of gunfire. Eventually, finding nothing, the soldiers cursed under their breath and trudged back out into the freezing rain. Yet, the psychological toll of this constant, high-stakes game of cat and mouse began to fracture the nerves of even the most resolute souls. The confinement of the tunnels was absolute. Freedom seekers sometimes spent weeks crammed into spaces so low they could never fully stand, breathing recycled air and listening to the muffled sounds of their pursuers walking right above them. In those cramped quarters, fear was a physical weight that pressed down on the chest. To combat the rising panic, Gabriel instituted a strict routine. He brought them food at precisely midnight, recited passages from memory, and listened to their stories of the plantations they had left behind. He became their anchor to humanity in a world that sought to treat them as beasts. As the 1850s wore on, the enforcement of the Fugitive Slave Act turned the surrounding countryside into a gauntlet. Federal marshals, emboldened by new legislation and lucrative bounties, began conducting unannounced sweeps of free black communities. Neighbors who had once shared quiet nods of solidarity now looked away, paralyzed by the fear of being implicated as conspirators. Gabriel's network became more isolated, more desperate, and infinitely more important. Every escape required a complex choreography of forged travel passes, coded knocks, and midnight boat rides across the swollen river to waiting wagons that would carry the freedom seekers further north toward Canada. By the time the cannon fire at Fort Sumter announced the dawn of the Civil War in 1861, Gabriel's tunnels had facilitated the escape of over 300 people. Think about that number. 300 individual human lives, mothers, fathers, daughters, sons, blacksmiths, seamstresses, dreamers, walked out of the darkness of Gabriel's basement and into the light of self-determination. When the Union troops finally pushed into the region, many of the very men Gabriel had sheltered returned in blue uniforms, carrying the muskets he had helped smuggle, ready to dismantle the system that had tried to consume them. Yet, when the war ended and the smoke cleared, Gabriel did not receive a medal. His name did not appear in the memoirs of Union generals, nor was he invited to Washington to shake the hand of the president. He was a black man in a southern town picking up the pieces of a fractured landscape, his work classified as a series of illegal acts by a regime that took years to acknowledge its own moral failure. The house eventually fell into disrepair, the wood rotted, the tunnels caved in under the weight of passing decades, and the earth reclaimed the secret spaces where history had been quietly rewritten in the dark. History loves the grand gestures, the Gettysburg Addresses, the Emancipation Proclamations signed with golden pens in gilded rooms. But true freedom was not handed down from a balcony, it was dragged out of the dirt by people like Gabriel, who risked the gallows to carve out a few feet of safety for a stranger. The tunnels are gone now, swallowed by modern foundations and paved roads, but the echo of their quiet defiance remains beneath the soil. If these forgotten footprints and the silent labor of those who built the roads to freedom resonate with you, take a moment to hit that subscribe button, leave a comment below with your own thoughts on the hidden architects of our history, and share this story with someone who needs to know how freedom was really won. Long after the monuments have weathered and the ink in the textbooks has faded, the ground beneath our feet still remembers the men and women who refused to stay in the dark.